You didn't arrive here by accident, even if you think you did, because something inside you has been quietly rearranging itself for a long time now. Not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently. You may feel it as exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, as disillusionment that success doesn't soothe, as a strange inner pressure that says something must change. The Stoics believed that the soul always knows before the mind admits it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the inner ruling principle speaks first through discomfort, not to punish you, but to redirect you. And if you are listening to this right now, there is a strong chance you are standing at the edge of that redirection. Here is the truth most people never hear. Your sensitivity did not ruin your life. Your depth did not make you weak. And your exhaustion is not failure. It is a signal that the old way of living, the way where you absorbed more than you expressed, gave more than you received, tolerated more than you should, has reached its natural end. The Stoics had a word for this moment. They called it prohairesis, the awakening of inner authority. The moment when a person realizes that continuing as before would be a form of self-betrayal. This is not a breakdown. It is a turning point, but only if you understand it correctly. Most people misunderstand what is happening to them here. They think they are becoming cold, detached, disillusioned. In reality, something far more dangerous and far more powerful is happening. They are becoming conscious. Epictetus taught that suffering begins not with pain, but with the belief that pain should not exist. For years you may have believed that your role was to absorb, to smooth over tension, to understand everyone else first. This belief was not moral, it was adaptive. At some point in your life, being emotionally perceptive kept you safe. Being agreeable reduced conflict. Being understanding preserved connection. But what once protected you can later imprison you. The Stoics were ruthless about this. They believed that any virtue practiced without wisdom eventually becomes vice. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Understanding without discernment becomes submission. Sensitivity without self-command becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion is where transformation begins. Seneca wrote that the soul grows tired of carrying what was never meant to be its burden. When that happens, the psyche intervenes, not gently, but decisively. You may notice it first as withdrawal, not depression, withdrawal, a loss of interest in conversations that once drained you, a quiet resistance to roles you once played automatically, an intolerance for emotional chaos you previously normalized. This is not you becoming selfish, it is you becoming aligned. Alignment is dangerous to systems that benefited from your misalignment. And this is why the Stoics warned that inner change often precedes external resistance. When you stop abandoning yourself, others feel the shift before they understand it. They sense that the version of you they relied on is no longer available, and this can create tension. But tension is not a sign you are wrong. It is a sign that unconscious contracts are dissolving. The Stoics believed that most human suffering comes from unconscious agreements, agreements to please, to endure, to remain silent, agreements made not out of strength, but out of fear of loss. The Stoic path is the process of consciously withdrawing from those agreements, not aggressively, but firmly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that no one can compel you to betray your own soul, but many will invite you to do so, politely, subtly, repeatedly. The real discipline is not resisting force, it is resisting familiarity, resisting the pull to return to what once felt normal, even when it no longer feels true. This is why the comeback you are experiencing feels quiet. It is not an external victory. It is an internal reordering. Your values are shifting. Your tolerance is narrowing. Your intuition is sharpening. You may feel guilt about this. The Stoics anticipated that too. Guilt is the echo of an outdated identity, an identity that equated goodness with endurance. But endurance without wisdom is not virtue. It is delay, and delay only postpones the inevitable reckoning. Seneca warned that people often collapse not because life is too hard, but because they lived too long without truth. Truth begins internally. It begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I keep this?" and start asking, "At what cost?" This question changes everything. You begin to notice how much energy you have been leaking, how much emotional labor you performed without consent, how often you silenced your instincts to preserve harmony. The Stoics did not admire this. They pitied it, because they understood that a person who never defends their inner life eventually loses it. This is where the modern world gets Stoicism wrong. Stoicism is not emotional suppression. It is emotional governance. You are allowed to feel everything, but you are no longer allowed to let feeling rule your conduct. This distinction is revolutionary, because once you stop reacting automatically, you reclaim power. Not power over others, power over yourself. And self-mastery is the only power the Stoics respected. Epictetus said that freedom is not getting what you want. It is wanting nothing that requires self-betrayal. Read that again, because this is the axis your life is turning on. You are no longer willing to sacrifice your inner stability for external approval. You are no longer willing to absorb emotional chaos to maintain connection. You are no longer willing to confuse empathy with obligation. This does not make you harder, it makes you clearer. Clarity is deeply unsettling to people who benefited from your confusion, and this is where fear often appears. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone, fear of losing connection. The Stoics never promised that the path of integrity would be comfortable. They promised it would be clean. Clean pain, clean loss, clean endings, as opposed to the slow corrosion of living against your own nature. If you are feeling this internal shift, it means something important. Your psyche is no longer willing to maintain a life that contradicts your values. This is not collapse. This is correction. In the next part, we will go deeper into what happens when you stop overgiving, stop explaining, and stop emotionally rescuing, and why this often triggers a powerful, unexpected reversal in how others perceive you. There is a moment that arrives quietly. It does not announce itself with certainty or confidence. It arrives disguised as fatigue, as indifference, as the sudden inability to care the way you once did. Most people panic at this stage. They assume something is wrong with them. The Stoics understood something different. They understood that when the soul withdraws energy, it is not malfunctioning, it is conserving. Epictetus taught that no person becomes free until they learn where their energy belongs. Energy, to the Stoic, is not motivation, it is life force, and life force is finite. For a long time, yours may have been distributed indiscriminately, to conversations that led nowhere, to people who consumed but never reciprocated, to emotional fires you were never responsible for extinguishing. This pattern often disguises itself as virtue, kindness, loyalty, understanding. But the Stoics were precise thinkers. They believed virtue must always be guided by reason. Without reason, even kindness becomes destructive. The moment you stop overgiving is often misinterpreted by others and sometimes by yourself. You may fear that you are becoming cold, detached, less human. In truth, you are becoming selective. Selection is not cruelty, it is discernment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the rational soul does not scatter itself. It chooses where to stand. This is the phase where your presence changes. You speak less, you explain less, you react slower. And paradoxically, this often draws more attention than your previous availability ever did. Why? Because predictability is comforting but forgettable. Consistency without boundaries becomes invisible. When you were always there, your presence required no awareness. Now it must be noticed. The Stoics never advised seeking attention, but they understood its mechanics. Human beings are attuned to change in availability, not because they are malicious, but because attention recalibrates value. When you stop rescuing emotionally, others are forced to face themselves, and this creates discomfort. Discomfort often manifests as confusion, questions, sudden interest, sometimes even admiration. But here is where most people fail. They interpret this shift as validation. They rush back into old patterns, eager to restore closeness. The Stoics warned against this impulse. Seneca wrote that returning to what harmed you simply because it calls you back is not compassion. It is weakness disguised as mercy. This phase requires discipline, not harshness, discipline. You must allow the space to exist without filling it, without explaining it, without apologizing for it. Silence is not absence. It is a boundary without violence. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because it removes their leverage. When you stop narrating yourself, others must interpret you without guidance. This is where projection begins. They fill the silence with meaning. Some will assume you are strong. Some will assume you are distant. Some will assume you are no longer invested. What matters is not which interpretation they choose. What matters is that you do not rush to correct it. Epictetus taught that if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and ignorant for a time. The same applies here. If you want to reclaim your energy, be content to be misunderstood temporarily. Misunderstanding is not damage, it is transition. This is also the moment when guilt often resurfaces, a familiar guilt, the guilt of not being everything to everyone, the guilt of choosing yourself. The Stoics addressed this directly. They believed guilt should only arise from moral failure, not from the refusal to self-sacrifice unnecessarily. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that no one benefits from a soul that has been exhausted into compliance. Your withdrawal is not abandonment. It is correction. Correction of a system that required you to be endlessly accommodating. As you hold this line, something interesting happens. Your internal state stabilizes. Your nervous system begins to relax. You are no longer bracing for emotional demands. You are no longer scanning for other people's moods. This creates an internal stillness. Stillness is power, not because it dominates, but because it cannot be manipulated easily. People test stillness. They provoke it. They attempt to re-engage old dynamics. The Stoics would call this a test of character. Not theirs, yours. Will you explain yourself again? Will you justify your boundaries? Will you re-enter emotional labor to ease someone else's discomfort? Or will you remain composed? Composure is not indifference. It is self-respect in motion. Seneca wrote that the wise person is neither unfeeling nor overwhelmed. They feel fully, but they do not surrender their judgment. This distinction becomes visible now. You may still care deeply, but you no longer chase. You may still love, but you no longer negotiate your dignity. This shift creates a paradox. Some people grow closer, others drift away. Both outcomes are correct. The Stoics believed relationships are revealed, not maintained, by integrity. When you stop bending, only what is aligned remains. This can feel like loss, but it is actually filtration. What remains is cleaner, more reciprocal, more honest, and what leaves was never sustainable. Here is where the true comeback begins, not externally, internally. Your self-trust returns. You begin to believe yourself again. Your instincts sharpen. You no longer override your intuition for the sake of peace. Peace that requires self-betrayal is not peace. It is postponement. The Stoics prized inner harmony above social harmony, because inner harmony produces a steadiness that cannot be shaken by opinion. This steadiness becomes visible, not in grand gestures, but in posture, eye contact, speech patterns. You no longer rush to fill silence. You no longer over-explain. You allow conversations to end naturally. This changes how people experience you. They feel less entitled, more attentive, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped offering yourself at a discount. The Stoics believed dignity is not claimed, it is preserved. Preservation requires restraint. This is why your comeback feels quiet. There is no announcement, no declaration, just a gradual return to yourself. And this return is noticed, even if it is not immediately acknowledged. There is a delayed consequence to composure. It does not arrive immediately. At first, there is quiet, space, a noticeable reduction in emotional noise. Then, slowly, something else begins to happen. Attention returns, not loudly, not directly, but unmistakably. The Stoics understood this pattern well. They observed that human beings are drawn to stability in the same way they are drawn to light, not because it asks for them, but because it does not. When you stop chasing connection, connection recalibrates. When you stop proving your worth, worth becomes assumed. This is not manipulation. It is psychology governed by natural law. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what stands firm does not need to persuade. It simply stands. And standing requires endurance. This phase is subtle and dangerous. Dangerous not because others return, but because you might forget why you changed in the first place. The Stoics warned repeatedly about this. They believed progress is most vulnerable at the moment of recognition. When others begin to notice your steadiness, your silence, your restraint, there is a temptation to re-engage, to explain, to soften, to reassure, to become once again emotionally accessible in the ways that previously depleted you. This temptation feels noble, but it is not. It is old conditioning resurfacing. Epictetus taught that every habit is a chain, even habits that once kept you alive. Breaking the chain is only half the work. Resisting the urge to pick it up again is the true discipline. When attention returns, it often does so indirectly. A message that feels casual but intentional, a question framed as concern, a sudden curiosity about your inner world. This is where clarity matters, not clarity about what others want, clarity about what you will no longer provide. The Stoics did not advise rejection. They advised discernment. Discernment means you observe without reacting. You receive without absorbing. You listen without committing. You allow people to reveal their intentions through consistency rather than words. Seneca wrote that time discovers truth, not interrogation. If someone returns because your absence unsettled them, time will reveal whether their interest is rooted in respect or convenience. Your task is not to decide immediately. Your task is to remain steady. Steadiness is unfamiliar to those accustomed to emotional availability. They may test it, push against it, attempt to provoke reaction. This is not always malicious. Often it is unconscious. People are drawn to what feels stable, but they also fear losing access to it. This fear produces behavior. Behavior reveals character. The Stoics trusted observation over assumption. They believed that patience is the highest form of intelligence, because patience allows reality to unfold without interference. During this phase, you may notice something else. Your emotional responses are no longer immediate. There is a pause, a gap between stimulus and response. This gap is everything. Viktor Frankl would later articulate it, but the Stoics lived it. In that space lies freedom. Not freedom to act impulsively, freedom to act deliberately. Deliberate action is the signature of a composed mind. When you respond deliberately, you stop being predictable. Predictability is comfortable, but it is also exploitable. The Stoics valued reliability, not predictability. Reliability means you act in alignment with principle. Predictability means you act in alignment with pattern. Patterns can be used against you. Principles cannot. This is why your presence now feels different. People sense that you are no longer operating on emotional reflex. They cannot anticipate how you will respond, and so they listen more closely. They choose their words more carefully. They pay attention. Attention is not demanded. It is earned through self-command. At this stage, you may experience a strange internal conflict. Part of you enjoys the recognition. Another part of you remains guarded. This is healthy. The Stoics did not believe in erasing desire. They believed in governing it. Desire itself is not the problem. Unexamined desire is. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that pleasure is neither good nor bad. It is simply an experience. What matters is whether it compromises reason. When attention returns, ask yourself one question. Does engaging here expand my inner stability or erode it? This question cuts through illusion. If engagement requires performance, explanation, or emotional labor, the cost is too high. If engagement respects your boundaries without negotiation, it may be worth considering. The Stoics believed relationships should strengthen virtue, not undermine it. Anything that destabilizes your composure is not connection. It is distraction. Another important shift occurs here. Your sense of identity detaches from external validation. You no longer measure yourself by how much you are wanted. You measure yourself by how aligned you remain. Alignment becomes the metric. This is a profound internal change, because once alignment becomes primary, rejection loses its power. You no longer interpret distance as failure. You interpret it as information. Information about compatibility, information about values, information about capacity. This perspective is liberating. It allows you to remain open without becoming exposed, open without becoming porous. The Stoics prized this balance. They believed the wise person participates fully in life while remaining internally intact. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional sovereignty. Sovereignty means you are not ruled by reaction. You are guided by judgment. Judgment refined through reflection. Reflection refined through experience. As you move through this phase, you may notice a deeper calm, not excitement, calm. Calm is often mistaken for boredom by those addicted to chaos. But calm is fertile. It is where clarity grows. From clarity, confidence emerges. Not loud confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that does not need reinforcement. This confidence is magnetic, not because it seeks, but because it does not need. The Stoics would say that neediness is the loudest form of poverty, and composure is wealth that cannot be taken. At some point, you will realize something important. You are no longer waiting for messages, waiting for recognition, waiting for permission. You are present, and presence is the rarest currency in the modern world. Presence means you are where you are, not anticipating, not replaying, not rehearsing. This presence transforms how you move through relationships. You listen differently. You speak with intention. You leave when it is time, not out of fear, out of self-respect. Self-respect is the foundation of all Stoic ethics. Without it, virtue collapses into performance. With it, even silence becomes meaningful. As attention stabilizes around you, your responsibility increases, not to others, to yourself, to remember why you chose this path, to remember the cost of the old one. The Stoics kept journals for this reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself so he would not forget who he was becoming. You must do the same internally. Remind yourself that you did not change to be noticed. You changed to be whole. If attention follows, let it follow. But do not turn toward it. Remain oriented toward your principles. There comes a moment when the transformation stabilizes, not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. The Stoics believe that the final stage of growth is not achievement, it is consistency. Consistency between who you are internally and how you move through the world. At this stage, you are no longer reacting to the past. You are no longer rehearsing explanations. You are no longer measuring yourself through the eyes of others. You are simply living from a settled center. Marcus Aurelius described this as the state of inner citadel, a place within the mind that cannot be invaded by opinion, loss, or unpredictability. Not because those things disappear, but because they no longer govern you. This is the true comeback. Not visibility, not recognition, not admiration, but sovereignty. Sovereignty over your attention, your energy, your emotional investments. You now understand something most people never do. Peace is not the absence of challenge. It is the absence of inner contradiction. When your values align with your actions, there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, nothing left to chase. The Stoics called this freedom. Freedom not from responsibility, but from compulsion. You still care, but you care deliberately. You still connect, but you do so without losing yourself. You still feel deeply, but your feelings no longer dictate your behavior.
This balance is rare, and rarity is often mistaken for distance. Some people will say, "You have changed." They are correct, but not in the way they think. You have not become colder. You have become clearer. Clarity can feel cold to those who relied on your confusion. You have not become distant. You have become self-contained. Self-containment does not reject intimacy. It simply refuses enmeshment. Seneca wrote that the wise person enjoys companionship without dependence. This distinction is everything. Dependence creates fear. Fear creates control. Control destroys connection. When you remove dependence, connection becomes voluntary. Voluntary connection is honest. It is chosen each time, not maintained through obligation or guilt. This is why your presence now feels different to others. There is no pressure around you, no urgency, no emotional gravity pulling people in. And, paradoxically, this is what makes your presence meaningful. People relax around those who are not trying to extract anything from them. They open up, they listen, they reflect, not because you demand it, but because you allow space for it. Space is the most generous thing you can offer another person. Space to be themselves, without rescue, without judgment, without absorption. The Stoics understood that influence does not come from force, it comes from example. When you embody composure, others feel invited into it. Some will rise, some will resist. Neither is your responsibility. Your responsibility
is to remain aligned. Alignment requires ongoing attention, not vigilance born of fear, but awareness born of respect for yourself. There will be moments when old patterns attempt to return, moments of loneliness, moments of doubt, moments when offering more feels easier than holding your boundary. The Stoics anticipated this. They did not believe wisdom eliminated struggle. They believed it clarified it. When temptation appears, it is not failure. It is practice. Epictetus taught that progress is revealed not when things go well, but when we meet difficulty without surrendering our principles. Every moment of restraint strengthens you. Every pause before reaction deepens you. Every choice to remain grounded reinforces the life you are building. This life is quieter, but it is solid. It does not depend on applause. It does not collapse under criticism. It does not require constant validation. It stands, and standing changes everything. You begin to attract different conversations, different relationships, different opportunities, not because you are trying, but because your internal order no longer tolerates chaos. Order recognizes order. This is not mysticism. It is alignment. People whose lives are ruled by impulse feel uneasy around discipline. People whose identities depend on drama feel exposed by calm. This is not something to correct. It is something to accept. The Stoics believed acceptance is the final form of power. Not passive acceptance, but acceptance of reality as it is, including the reality that not everyone can walk beside you at this stage. Loss may still occur, but it will be clean, not traumatic, not corrosive. Clean endings preserve dignity on both sides. Clean endings do not require villains, only honesty. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You no longer need to explain your boundaries. You no longer need to justify your evolution. Your life will speak for you, quietly, persistently. This is what the Stoics meant when they spoke of living in accordance with nature. Not nature as chaos, nature as order, as rhythm, as proportion. You now understand proportion. How much to give, how much to hold, how much to say, how much to leave unsaid. This wisdom did not come cheaply. It came through exhaustion, disappointment, disillusionment, and reflection. Nothing was wasted. The Stoics believed that no experience is meaningless if it produces understanding. Your past sensitivity was not a mistake. It was untrained strength. Now it is refined, governed, directed. This is why the comeback feels internal, why it does not announce itself, why it does not need witnesses. You know, and knowing is enough. If this reflection resonated with you, it suggests a shared orientation toward depth, toward ideas that are not consumed quickly, but lived with. Supporting this work allows more of these explorations to exist, not as content, but as conversation. A thoughtful subscription ensures that future reflections reach those who value composure over noise. If someone you trust would find meaning here, sharing this with them may open a dialogue worth having, not to persuade, but to reflect together. And if you choose to leave a comment, let it be intentional, a thought that stayed with you, an insight you recognized, a quiet acknowledgement of the care behind this work. Such responses are not metrics. They are signals, and they matter. Stoicism does not promise happiness. It promises coherence. And coherence is the foundation of a life that cannot be easily shaken. That is the real return, and it is yours to keep.